Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar on the 6 habits and home run, the secrets behind the success of top tier sales engineers. My name is Brian Lewis. I'm co-founder and CRO of Homerun Presales. I'm going to be today's host, and I'm very excited to have with me Chris White. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm very, very well, Brian. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. If you're not familiar with Homerun, I'll start there. As a company, we are the pre-sales workspace that gets high-performing teams through their day with one place to track, manage, organize, and inform all of their pre-sales efforts. Chris, you are co-founder of Tech Sales Mastery. You are the author of the reason we're here today, the 6 Habits of Highly Effective Sales Engineers. Tell us a little about yourself and Tech Sales Mastery in the book.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to, and I do see a few familiar faces in the list of participants. So, Brian, and I just published something, or I posted this on LinkedIn this morning. So I published the book about 5 years ago, almost to the day, and I happened to glance at the book on Amazon this morning and saw that it had peaked on the number one best-selling slot in the sales and selling presentations category. So yeah,
Nice.
it's really been and thank you. It's been an amazing journey. And we'll obviously we'll talk quite a bit about the 6 habits. My background, I was an enterprise architect for 15 years before I got into pre-sales. And then when I got into pre-sales, I thought I was going to be brilliant because I could move a mouse and talk at the same time. And I had no idea what it really meant to be a sales professional.
Mhm.
And so made a lot of mistakes, finally figured it out, moved into a manager role and created the first version of the training and back then, and that was in 2010. And yeah, I published the book in 2019. I launched the original business was launched shortly thereafter in 2020. And recently I merged with Kerry Sokolsky. Kerry runs a bit or has been running a business called Presales Mastery.
Mhm.
And he and I recently joined forces and formed Tech Sales Mastery. And to be fair, we're a little bit in sort of stealth mode right now. We've got some things that we're working on that we'll be coming out with later in the year. So yeah, just delighted to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Congrats on all the success with the book and the business and the evolution there. As any business goes through, you keep evolving and looking at what's next, and how do we support our customers better and better.
Indeed.
But Chris, I've been looking forward to, I mean, I know we've talked on LinkedIn Live before, but I've been excited to do this webinar for a long time because I'm a big believer in the 6 habits. I've had the book myself for a long time. I've spent 18 years in a pre-sales role, almost 19 now. I still continue on every call, every demo when we're doing our internal prep. There's always things to be thinking about. There's always ways to get better, despite having a long, career doing more or less the same thing.
Yeah.
But to actually talk about now how the 6 habits and the value they bring to an organization and Homerun as a pre-sales platform can bring to an organization, and better yet, how they can actually work together to level
Yeah.
up a pre-sales organization. I've been waiting for this topic for a long time. So I'm really glad we're here.
Yeah. Excited to have the conversation as well.
Yeah. And just so everybody knows, there's a lot to get through. There's 6 habits. There's some great discussion for each one. We're going to see if we get through all 6 today. Chris and I decided we may not. And if we don't, then there'll be a part 2 or maybe even a part 3, depending on how today goes. So if we don't get through all 6, trust us, we will get there someday. So Chris, let's get into it. Habit number 1, partner. We always, I think as SEs always like to joke about, well, it's not the AE that closes the deal, it's the SE that closes the deal. And I'm sure the AE says, I'm the one that closes the deal and the SE is my support team. Tell us why partnership is important and what defines a good SE-AE partnership.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think one of the most important questions for us to consider. And it's interesting. And I wrote about this in the book. When I first became a sales engineer, I didn't think of myself as being a sales professional. And in fact, I think I looked at the account executives as sort of being almost in an opposite team, or sort of, I had sort of a me versus them or us versus them mentality. And it finally occurred to me that not only am I part of the sales team, but I really need to form a bond and form a partnership with my sales counterparts.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, the cornerstone theme, if I can use that term, is sales is a team sport. We are in this together. And look, account executives, there's a tremendous amount of work that takes place behind the scenes that we're not privy to. They're prospecting, they're knocking on doors, or facing rejection on a daily basis. There's a tremendous amount of work just to get the meeting that we're invited into
Hmm.
that we don't see. But on the flip side, typically, particularly in the software world, deals don't close without SEs achieving the technical win. And so we do need to build that foundation. Now, when you asked what does it take to build an effective partnership,
Hmm.
allow me to share. I do have just a few thoughts that I'll share that will sort of drive this home a little bit further. First and foremost, our goals and objectives need to be clarified and aligned. And at the end of the day, we need to remember that whether you're an AE or an SE, we have a collective responsibility. We have a fiduciary responsibility to generate and protect revenue for
Hmm.
the organization.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, we need effective communication. And by the way, and Brian, you know this, a big part of effective communication is not just delivering information, but it's receiving information, right? It's
Hmm.
listening,
Yeah. Yep.
right? And it's consistent and continuous. Number three is mutual respect for one another. I think that as SEs, it's too easy for us to feel like we do, quote, all the heavy lifting,
Hmm.
and that they, quote, have the easy job,
Sure.
and yet they're getting the big commission check, and we're not. The truth, if we're honest with ourselves, those of us who are SEs, most of us probably wouldn't want that role, because we walk into the room as the expert,
Yeah.
right? We're placed on a pedestal as the expert, whereas the AEs, they're dependent on us to come in and do, and yet they're the ones who have to deal with procurement, and there's so many things that they do that we just wouldn't want to do.
Yeah. You know,
And
it's
go ahead.
interesting you say that, because one of my earliest role when I went into an SE role, it was actually a bit of an SE AE hybrid. And so I had to do, both the SE side of things and then also negotiate contracts and things like that. And even in, my role at Homerun, have had to do some of that as well. You're both, AE and SE, and we've got a team now that helps kind of separate out some of the roles a little bit. Um, but when the last company I was at, when we finally grew up and had more of a defined sales organization, and I was in the pre-sales side of things now, because that's just what I really love to do and was really good at it. It was actually kind of nice on occasion to be like, to just be able to sit back and say, I don't need to do all of that. I don't have to do that. I can just show up and do the demo. And I kind of liked it. But then, of course, after a while, I was like, well, I'm doing a lot of the heavy work. And then, you go back and realize that negotiating contract or pricing terms or red lines with legal, like that's not easy work to do. It's
Mm-mm,
not fun work
mm-mm.
either. It is more fun to show up and give a demo and be smart and ask good questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
feel you on that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a really key point. I mean, I do feel like we have the fun part of sales.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is also an important point, though. We can't think of ourselves as just the person who shows up to give the demo. We
Yeah.
we have to take ownership of the technical victory. We
Hmm.
have to take, and Brian, this is a term I think you've heard me use a time or two. We have to think of ourselves almost as success engineers. And what
Hmm.
do I mean by that? Success for the customer,
Yeah.
success for the client, right? We need to be invested in their success, and we need to be invested in the success of the organization and
Yeah.
success of all the deals, right? It's not
Hmm.
just, and by the way, most of us who excel in this profession, we love showing up and having the spotlight and doing our thing. I mean, that's an important part of
Sure.
our role, but we also have to be invested in closing deals. If I may, I'll just share just
Yeah,
a few other thoughts. I do think that we need to have a division of roles and responsibilities
mhm,
that are established and clarified. And I know one of the things that I think you'll talk about is how can we do that in a more automated fashion
sure.
with Homerun. Each party takes responsibility for their part of the sale,
Yeah.
right? And you know it's interesting, Brian. I run workshops, and probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was running a workshop, and I had AEs and SEs in the same room in the same
Hmm.
session. And at one point, it was one of those poignant moments. I had an AE who sort of raised his hand. He said, Chris, I need my SEs to be able to, quote, run their own routes.
Mm, sure.
In other words, if I have to tell you everything to do, there's a problem.
Yeah.
I thought that was really powerful. We clear expectations on a consistent basis. We need to
Hmm.
make sure that they understand what we're doing. We understand what they're doing, and that's a consistent communication.
Yeah.
A feedback loop is built into the process.
Yeah.
We prioritize the customer and or the opportunity over our own personal agenda. And if we're fully on, I mean, I think we accuse sales of having, quote, a personal agenda because they're just trying to hit the number. They're just trying to, and
Sure.
by the way, we're all financially motivated. But if we're fully honest with ourselves, we have a personal agenda as well.
Of course. Yep.
And we need to show loyalty to the company and to the product and to one another. And
That's a tough
the
one.
final,
So
go ahead.
the
Sorry.
loyalty is an interesting one because, especially when we think about like the product itself or something along those lines, we all know our own products well, especially as SEs. We all know that every product could be way better. That's why we have a roadmap of all the things that we want to add in. It's really hard to, and it it's not, I mean, I guess it is loyalty, but sort of sometimes you know the company messaging and you got to stick to it, or you'd really like to say, it does this, but not this, and I really should do that. And sometimes you just kind of can't do that. Now, if it's ever going to hurt a customer or the customer really needs it, at least on the home run side, we always say, well, then you log it as a feature request. It's a blocker to buy. It's a future need. It's a nice to have. Make sure the product team has that. Make sure your post sales team knows that in case it's going to come up in the future. So that is part loyalty to both the customer, which you said, keep the customer in mind, loyalty to the company, in that you are sharing information in the right way with the teams that need it. But sometimes it can be a little bit tough to not want to disclose everything that we know. That's hard as an SE sometimes, I think.
And you may or may not recall this, Brian. I actually have a very specific term for what you're saying, which is thou shalt not voluntarily confess thy sins, right?
Yep.
Thou shalt, and what do I mean by that? It's precisely what you're saying, because we know the warts, we know the things that it can't do.
Yeah.
We know the things that we would like it to do, but it doesn't. And sometimes we feel compelled to draw attention to that. Like
Yeah.
I've literally seen demos that start with, before I begin, let me make it clear what the tool can't do. Why would we ever do that?
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, why do we do that? Because we're almost playing mind reader. Like we're anticipating what it is that they're thinking, and
Yeah.
we're trying to get out in front of it. Now, here's the key point on this one, Brian. And you said it. What's in the best interest of the customer?
Yeah.
If it's in the best interest of the customer to call attention to maybe limitations because you sense that they are potentially overthinking what it can or cannot do,
Yeah.
then by all means, let's make sure we're painting the right picture. But if it's an unnecessary thing, and in fact it potentially is going to cause them to overthink or make a wrong or make the bad decision, we
Yeah.
leave it out.
Well,
Brian, I'm sorry, go
okay.
ahead.
No, I like this topic because I think it fits. It's clearly in this partner habit of, and there's okay, you said, don't disclose the secrets. The phrase that we use, and I adopted this from my co-founder, Kevin, who got it from one of his go-to-market mentors, Brian Lake, which is don't break into jail.
I love
Right. Now, the key part of that is, again, if we keep the customer in mind, at some point, if there's something that's going to cause a problem or going to be friction, we don't want any surprises, right? There's no bait and switch. That's never going to work well for anybody. this is where the partnership between SE and AE comes in, which is on the call, I might know something. Now, as an SE, I need to have some situational awareness to decide, is right now the time to bring this up? Or acknowledge something, move on, whatever, knowing that I'm going to have to circle back, partner with my AE, make a strategy for how are we going to handle this? How are we going to have this conversation, which might put the deal in a bad place, but might be necessary. So there is some timing of like, well, how are we going to do this? It's around partnership for the strategy of it. And I think that's key, is having that situational awareness to say, maybe now is not the right time to have that conversation, but I know we have to have it. Also, let me make sure I go capture that somewhere so we don't not remember to have that conversation. So yeah.
Exactly. And if I may, I'll even add take that one step further. Let's just say, for example, we're presenting to a prospect or a customer, and our sales counterpart says something that may not be 100% true. Maybe it's a misinterpretation, a slight exaggeration, what
Sure.
have you. Here's my litmus test. Is this potentially damaging to the customer or not? If
Hmm.
it's not, no harm, no foul. I'm going to
Yeah.
have, to your point, I'm going to have that conversation after the fact and first say, do you understand what you said, or do you
Yeah.
understand why what you said might be potentially misleading?
Yeah.
Right? They may or may not understand, may or may not know. Right
Yep.
now, if in that moment, what I'm thinking, situational awareness, to your point, is I can't let this go, because if the customer walks away with this expectation, we're setting them and us up for failure.
Yeah.
At that point, I may interject and say, now, what my colleague Matt said is true in some cases, but given your circumstances,
Yeah.
given what you're trying to do, there are some nuances that are important to
Yeah.
right. And then I'll sort of set the record straight while giving him or her the opportunity to save face. So
Yeah.
it's such a good lesson. And then the final thing that I have here on my list, Brian, which I'm inspired to share, and I think this is a good segue into some of how Homerun can help sales engineer organizations and individuals do this. I think we need to be proactive with
Hmm.
our sales counterparts.
Yeah.
I think we need to be proactive with our customers at
Hmm.
times. And I think this doesn't come as naturally to us as it does to our sales counterparts. They are used to reaching out to customers and prospects. They're used to getting the meetings and getting things going. And by the way, we are used to being pulled in by our sales counterparts, but I think sometimes we need to be proactive
Yeah.
as well. So with that sort of backdrop, Brian, I'm interested in hearing more, and you and I've talked a little bit, but I'd love to hear more and have you share more about how can Home Run actually help facilitate the partnership.
Yeah. Um, So when we think about the partnership side of it, there's you had this in your list. There's around communication, there's around process, which I know is a key part of the book as well, in that habit around what's the right process, which also then roles and responsibilities and how do we coordinate. From a process perspective, we always think about where is an SE, and whether you're a sales engineer, solution consultant, solution architect, or any other title, I'm just going to say SE for most of the day. If you're an SE, when are you getting involved in that particular deal? Um, that is going to ultimately, whether it's a Salesforce or HubSpot CRM or whatever, that's ultimately going to create what we call a workspace for that opportunity of that deal. It's going to bring in information of, well, what's already known. So just some pure data flow. This is what's already been captured in our CRM. As an SE, I need to know that. It's now in my Homerun workspace for this op. Um, and so there's going to be back and forth communication. I make some updates here. That's going to update the CRM. Now, I should be having regular conversations with my AE about deal and deal strategy, in which case I'm also augmenting what I'm doing in my workspace. So it's not only I put a field here and they read that field there and they fill out a field there and I read that field here. If that's the way you're doing it wrong. I'm sorry, but that's true. You actually have to be sitting down and talking to the AE about what's our strategy on this, how do we want to work through it. But the flow of information and the process around it becomes really important. So when we talk about that workspace, this is that one place for an SE to capture, review everything that they need to do about that op. So And also to have it at the ready. This is one of the ways that we think partnership is, how does an SE hold up their side of it? By having
Mhm.
good information at the ready. So stuff's not, stuck in notes or buried in emails or Slack messages, which is often where a lot of information is. But if I'm going to come have that conversation with you about a deal we're working on, I want to be able to pull up my workspace and say, this is what I know, this is how I'm feeling, here's my sentiment, here's my warning signs, here's some key highlights I've highlighted or captured. These are the feature requests that I'm worried about, right? It's all kind of right there in one place. Um, and another part of it is not just the capture of and review of good information, although that is a key part of it. Because if I don't have that, then I can't be a good partner to my AE on this deal and a good partner then to our customer either. Customer doesn't want me to have to come back and say, "Hey, Chris, I'm sorry, I forgot. What hosting provider are you all using again? Was it AWS or GCP?" You can do that once. You do that 3 times over the course of a deal. The buyer teams are aware of this. They're going to realize you're all not paying attention to what we're saying. They don't feel like you're understanding us. So part of what the SE is doing in that partnership is with AE and customer is, keep things up to date, have the information at the ready. But the other part of it is around process. And this will kind of come up a little bit later when we talk about, the habit around prepare, which is, what's the step-by-step guide that an SE is following to move deals through? Are there certain gates or certain key tasks that need to get done? Hey, if this is a deal over $100,000 ARR, we're always going to do a dry run. Let's make sure we got that kind of codified as part of our pre-sales best practices, let alone our sales best practices overall. So kind of the idea of good information, good communication, and process, part of the way Homerun helps companies with habit number one, partner.
And what immediately comes to mind for me, Brian, one of the items on my list was each party takes responsibility for their part of the sale.
Yeah,
And to me, what this just screams out to me is we are being structured. We as a sales engineer organization, we are being structured about how we take responsibility for our part of the sale.
yeah, yeah,
Right? We've thought it through. We're capturing information. We've got a process. And at any point, if sales needs sort of a closer insight into, because here's the truth, they don't need and probably don't want to see all the things that we're capturing and tracking, right? There's
yeah,
details that they would be just as happy to be not involved in, but we need to capture that level of granularity. Yet we are doing so in a structured manner, just like ideally
yeah,
they are as well in the CRM,
yeah,
right?
for sure.
So
Yeah.
and to me, we do need to define our stages and our process similar to the way sales does. And by if I can use the term separating in this way with our own dashboard in Homerun, that gives us our process and our approach and our plan, and we are taking ownership. And
Yeah.
Brian, I cannot tell you how many. I mean, I work with a lot of sales organizations. I work with a lot of software companies.
Mhm.
Every sales organization I work with, that's one of the biggest things is I need my SEs to take ownership
Yeah.
of their part of the sale. And that's what I see happening here.
And then you need, the SE managers to be able to support taking ownership, which means good deal review and good one-on-ones and where are the warning signs and what's the process and where are you stuck? And, even down to, I know there's different variations around activity tracking, but are you getting sucked into projects or by a certain AE on deals that it's a waste of your time, in which case the SE manager has a role to play in helping coordinate and mitigate and guide the team. Um, and since we're still talking about partner, trying to zoom out, I mean that partnership between the SE and the AE is the nucleus of the partnership on closing an opportunity, but also a level out, which is the pre-sales team overall has valuable insights that in partnership with the sales team overall, what are the deals in best case or commit that have some kind of pre-sales warning sign? At least in Homerun, that's something that's going to be surfaced up immediately. And pre-sales managers and sales managers can have conversations around those deals before you blow the forecast. how do you bring that information earlier in the sales forecasting cycle so that deals don't get that far if they've got some problems? And another, we talk a lot about pre-sales teams have data or are sitting on data that no one else has, but everyone wants. So sales wants it, product wants it. What are the feature gaps or product gaps that we're hearing that are losing us deals right now, or that are going to introduce churn risk? I
Mm.
posted about this one recently. Every CRO right now is desperate to retain revenue. Get new revenue, yes, but retain what you've got. Pre-sales teams have a role to play in preventing the introduction of churn risk. If I'm talking to you as a buying team and you tell me about a feature that you need and you say, hey, I say, hey, Chris, we don't support that today. You say, oh, that's okay. We can buy without it. We'll need it for the future. It's kind of important to us, but we're good for right now. I might be, as an SE, I could say, oh, fantastic, no problems. We're ready. They're ready to buy. But that right there is where you introduce churn risk, because that customer is not going to forget, or soon to be customer is not going to forget that they needed that. They said it was important. And if it doesn't show up in the roadmap or doesn't show up in the product, they're going to start to get a little bit worried. You're kind of introducing churn risk. So I like the idea of partner both at that nuclear level or nucleus level, and also kind of all the different kind of circles around from there and the rest of the organization.
Well, and I was going to say, you're right. It's not just with sales. It's within the team, but it's marketing, it's product, it's all the other organizations as well.
Yeah.
But by the way, Brian, I don't know if you saw Adam's question
I
in
was
the
just looking
chat.
at that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Adam, thank you for the question. So it's I think it's an important question. Any tips for the AE, for if the AE is not used to us taking ownership and takes it the wrong way? Again, Adam, thank you for your question. The the first thought that comes to mind is I have to make an assumption what Adam means by quote takes it the wrong way. But what I'm assuming and what I have seen is AEs some well and for starters, let's remember AEs have an emotional attachment to their opportunities. Period.
Mhm.
They have an emotional attachment to their opportunities. And so sometimes AEs might feel as though they want to retain control. And by us taking ownership of the technical victory or the technical solution or the technical strategy or positioning, they might, and Adam, I'm sort of assuming this is where you're going, they might feel as though they are being maybe encroached upon or they, okay, he said exactly, protective of their protective of their turf, so to speak. I think it comes down to, first of all, having a conversation, setting expectations, and building some trust.
Mhm.
Here's what I believe to be true about all sales professionals. They will work with anyone and everyone who helps them close more deals and hit the number,
Yep.
period. And so if they view us as someone that they can trust to help them close the deal and hit their number, I think they are far more likely to give us a little bit more of that ownership as we're talking about. So I think unfortunately, Adam, I think it does take time. I literally ran a workshop this week for a client out in Salt Lake City. In fact, I just flew back late last night, and a very similar conversation was, or a similar question was asked. And one of the things I share with them is remember these three letters: EOI. What do those three letters stand for? First is expectations.
Mhm.
Set and clarify. Oh, there's my Apple,
That's
my new
right.
Mac playing tricks. First, set expectations, set and clarify expectations. These are my expectations. Are we on the same page? This is what I expect, and I feel as though I'm responsible for taking ownership of the technical solution and the technical win. And this is how I plan to communicate and coordinate with you accordingly. Are we on the same page?
Mhm.
That's number one. Oh, observations.
Yeah.
This is what I've observed. Do you see it differently? Because maybe the problem is there. But if we're aligned on expectations and we're now aligned on observations and we see it the same way, I is interpretations. Now I'm left to interpret. I don't want to interpret it in a negative way. I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. So help me understand how it is that I should interpret your saying whatever or doing whatever. So Adam, I hope that's helpful a little bit.
Yeah.
These relationships, it takes time to build trust, and we got to put things on the table and have tough, those difficult conversations.
Yeah, I think, I mean, along those same lines, I don't think you ever want to surprise, especially an AE on a call with a customer. Behind closed doors, all kinds of stuff you can do and say and plan and strategize. But in the moment, there's always, it kind of goes back to what we said earlier around don't break into jail. It's kind of almost don't break into jail with your AE. There's a time and a place to have certain conversations or certain corrections, or even what does it mean to take ownership? If you've done, I know we haven't even gotten to, prepare yet, but as in terms of partnership, if you've defined roles and responsibilities, you've built that trust, you've talked about how calls are going to go and who should say what and when and how, that goes a long way because that means when we're on a call, I know whether to, yes, go deeper on this topic or let it sit. And also just having a conversation around the either explicit, because you talk to your AE about it, so you're prepping for this, but what are the cues, whether it's a word choice, an interruption in a certain way, so that if you start talking over me, I know it's because you want me to zip it. Now's not the right time. So if I feel like I'm going to take a little, I got a good answer to this question, and you kind of chime in, I should know why you're doing that, so we don't start battling. Well, hold on, Chris, let me finish my answer. No, that looks horrible for a customer. But if I know why you're doing it, because we've planned out some of this stuff before, if you talk over me in this way, or if you do something, that's my cue just to rein it in and zip it. Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the other, and I'm looking at the clock. This is why, folks, we said that we may not get through all 6 habits. We're halfway through and only still on habit number 1. Um, but also, I think that this is where that balance can come into play as well, and where an AE can really leverage the SE is that a buyer doesn't only want to hear from the rep. They know the rep's there to close the deal. They know the SE is there primarily to provide good information, be the technical consultant and the technical advisor, or the trusted advisor, as people like to say. So strategic use of the SE, and sometimes SE only follow-up, right? In conjunction with the AE saying, after this demo, or we're getting ghosted by a buying team, Chris, as my SE, can you send this email, or why don't you engage this where you might have the idea, hey, Brian, why don't I send this white paper on that topic? I'm going to only send it from me. That way, it's maybe a little bit of a safer space. I will obviously report back any response I get. But that is also a way that an SE can take some ownership within the eyes of the customer anyway, even though it's a well-coordinated, activity with the AE and the SE.
Yeah. The irony in what you said, you mentioned that the customer or the prospect doesn't only want to hear from the AE. The reverse is also true. When we're presenting to a customer, and my guess is that some of the folks on the call or in the audience have experienced this, where the AE basically opens up the meeting and says, and here's Brian, and he's going to tell you everything you need to know about the platform, and then goes off video and sort of disappears, right?
Yeah.
So AEs and SEs need to present a united front
Yep.
to the customer. AEs need to be actively engaged in the conversation, and as well as SEs, and that's really what we're talking about here.
Yep.
Brian, there's one final thought that I have on this one, and it's this idea of what I call the 51-49 rule. And you may or may not have heard me share this before, but I do think that we as SEs, we need to have, quote, an equal seat at the table. We need to think of ourselves as an equal partner in sales and the sales strategy, and we need to find and have our voice. And some of what you were just showing there in Homerun, I feel like that's our way of establishing our information, our process, our voice. But I always give them the last vote.
Sure.
Why? Because at the end of the day, it's their neck on the line, not necessarily mine, if these deals don't close, or if we don't hit the quota. So what's 51-49 rule? They have 51% of the vote. I get 49% of
Yeah.
the vote. They
Yeah.
get the final word. So
I think that's true. I mean, we are, even if we have a variable compensation portion to our comp plan, it's not the same as the AE. If we hit numbers, it's not the SE who's typically going to get laid off or put on a PIP. It's going to be the AE. So we
yep.
have a level of protection. And because of that, I agree. You got to let your AE take the lead on certain things. And if you disagree in the appropriate setting, you have an escalation path. Go talk to your manager, and then they can have a manager to manager conversation and like escalate it up, keep a good relationship. One other thing that I did some coaching for a junior SE last year, and one of the issues was kind of feeling like that she wasn't quite respected by the AE yet, in terms of how that I'm valuable and how do I earn that respect or show that value. And I've got the Homerun workspace or up again, but part of the way that we kind of coached around this was you can only do so much. So if they're not bringing you into deals in the way you want, you can always go to talk to your manager. But the thing you can do is hold up your end of the process. The best thing you can do is if you're on a call, make sure you be proactive to reach out to your AE and try and strategize as best you can so you're prepared. So come in prepared, capture good information, make sure you've got all the details, feed them what you're hearing. So the better you can enable the AE with good information at the ready, keep them up to date, remind them of the technical details, warn them of the warning signs. They're going to start to respect that because they're going to rely on that information. Chris has great information, keeping me up to date on every deal, so I don't have to remember all of it. Fantastic. So
Mm.
even if you don't quite get the respect yet, just keep doing your thing. Like that's the best, that's the only thing you can do really is be a great SE and eventually it'll start to work out.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. I don't have it. I don't have it at the ready, but I have a slide that I usually include in my workshops that there's three key things to building trust with sales, and one of the three is delight and impress their customers.
Yeah.
Right? Delight and impress their and by the way, I think the third of the three is you use the term enable sales.
Mhm.
The term I use is lighten their load as
Yeah.
much as you can. Lighten their the more heavy lifting that we can do within reason, of course, the more likely they are to respect us, trust us, and want to work with us.
Yeah. 100%. All right, let's move on. I mean, I'm glad we spent so much time there because that really is the beginning of how the rest of these habits and even use of home run come into play, and really how you close deals in the end, having that right partnership. If there's problems in the partnership, it creates problems on every other part of the rest of the sales cycle.
Yeah,
So
it's the
habit number
foundation.
two, yeah, exactly, foundation. So habit number two is probe. As SEs, I mentioned we always like to joke that we're the ones that close the deals. I think as SEs, we also like to joke, and say, oh, we're going, what discovery notes, from the AE. I got nothing. I'm coming in cold. Um, Talk to us about probe. What is probe? Why is it important?
Yeah. So as the name suggests, probe is all about technical discovery, and it's us doing technical discovery. And Brian, it's interesting as I reflected on the early part of my career as a sales engineer. For first, it took me a little while to come to peace with the fact that I was in sales, and then once I came to peace with it, I really sort of got into this groove where I was like, man, I'm on a roll now. Just book me for meetings and put me in front of the customer, and I'll just crush it. What I realized is by relying solely on what my account executives or my sales counterparts had to say, put me in some very difficult situations. Why? Because they didn't know what they. In fact, I've got a slide here that sort of emphasizes the point. They don't ask what SEs will ask,
Mhm.
and they don't hear what they don't hear what we will hear,
Yeah.
right? And they can't interpret what it is that they're hearing into how best to position the software or the solution. What I learned is that discovery may very well be the most important part of our job. And we have to collaborate with sales. We shouldn't be showing up asking the same questions. We shouldn't be showing up asking questions that we should already know the answers to. But to me, the ability to effectively engage in discovery, ask questions in a way that builds credibility, ask questions in a way that gets people to open up and share is absolutely critical to our success. And Brian, you know this. There may be some people on in the audience here who've heard me say this before, but I'll share it for the purpose of emphasis. I refer to
Yeah.
this as my golden rule of selling software. He or she who buys a shovel doesn't want a shovel; they want a hole. But they don't just want a hole; they want a fence or a tree. But they don't just want a fence or a tree; they want privacy or shade or fruit or flowers. And Brian, I keep it in the office. We tend to show up with the shiny shovel and we want to talk about the blade and the handle and how wonderfully built it
Yeah.
is. And the problem is most people don't care about the shiny shovel, and those who do don't often have the budget. And why does this come up during habit number 2? Because I think one of the mistakes that we make when we do get involved in discovery is we're a little bit too focused, narrowly focused on the technical specifications, the
Yeah.
technical requirements, the technical needs. The reality is that our discovery should also be digging into, at the end of the day, what are they ultimately trying to achieve?
Mhm.
What are the outcomes? What are the priorities? So that, and ideally, why are we doing discovery? So we can tailor the demo,
Yeah.
tailor the presentation, tailor the solutioning to best fit their needs, what they are trying to achieve. And the demo, if we're going to assemble and present a demo or run a POC or whatever it is, it needs to align ultimately with what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
It needs to align with, as I like to say, the decision maker's whiteboard,
Yeah.
right? And imagine, folks, the decision maker is funny. I was in an office. I told you I was in Salt Lake City this week, and we were in one of those sort of a WeWork, and it was a great office, by the way. And as I walked around on the floor that we were on, there was probably half a dozen, maybe 10 different companies, and all the walls were glass walls. So
Mhm.
literally you could see into every organization. And as I walked around, I saw whiteboards on various offices. And what's on the whiteboards? Strategic initiatives, major accounts, major problems,
Yeah.
the projects, the initiatives, et cetera. Imagine the decision maker's whiteboard. And how can you how can you demonstrate your solution or present your solution in such a way that aligns to the decision maker's whiteboard?
Yeah.
To me, that's what discovery is all about. And Brian, I'll share one final thought around discovery that I think is particularly prevalent to using a platform like Homerun. And that is, discovery is not a one-time event.
Mhm.
Discovery is not something we do to people. Discovery is a process. And throughout the sales process, throughout the life cycle, throughout the buyer's journey, as we like to say, there's important information for us to be capturing
Yeah.
along the way. And so without, I think you call it a workspace, but without a
Yep.
workspace, without a convenient and structured way to capture that information, it's possible that we're going to lose or continue to ask the same question over and over that we forget. So I'll pause there just for a moment, Brian, because I know you're going to weigh in here a little bit, but that's the habit number 2. As I say, it may very well be the most important part of our job, which is the ability to effectively extract and educe the
Yeah.
information that we need to effectively position the solution.
Yeah. And I flashed it back up since you called it out. It's important that we ask the right questions, we listen in the right way, we get beyond the shovel and all the way to the shade or the flowers or the fruit or whatever they're ultimately looking for. And you are capturing details and tidbits and anecdotes and acronyms and whatever it is. It's where do you stick all the stuff? You, in the moment, you're in it and you're listening. You're like, yeah, okay, we can. And you're already thinking we can help. And I know what I'm going to demo. You may not say it just yet because we're just in discovery mode, but there is zero chance that you are going to remember every detail about every deal every day. You did that discovery call 2 months ago. And then they had a SKO, so whatever, or they had a big conference and all the team that you're selling to was busy, and then they're going to come back now. Now they're re-engaging. You really going to remember all of that? No, 100% not. And so if you're lucky, if you took any notes, and if you have notes, then you've got plenty of notes. But then where is all the stuff? And now you're getting ready to go into, our soon to be next habit around prepare. How do you remember it? So this is where the value of the Homerun workspace comes in. It is a place for SEs to stick their stuff. And yes, update, CRM fields if that's part of the process, which it usually is. But there's also other stuff, my notes, my follow-ups, my highlights. So when you're going through, at least in Homerun, there's usually going to be some technical attributes. There's some basic technical details that you would know these are going to be questions that are going to be asked during discovery. You need a place to kind of capture those answers and report and also report on it. How many of our deals are on AWS as a hosting provider? If hosting provider was a technical detail that you know to ask about, and are we performing well? What's our technical win rate when somebody's on AWS? And that data is not just for me as an SE; it has great value to the rest of the organization as well. But you need a place to put it, and you need a place to put it. And this is part of Homerun's not so secret to success is it has to be a place that works and was designed for the way an SE thinks, the way they work day to day, their pace of movement, call to call to call to call. How do I know what's most important? And in our workspace, one of the things that's my personal favorite feature in all of Homerun is something that we call the highlights. It's really simple. If you ask any SE about any one of their deals, there's usually a couple of little highlights, tidbits that I say those are the most important things. CrowdLogic, which is the fictitious company on my slide here, they have a focus on process automation. I remember they told us that. They said speed's a key decision factor. That's important. And Chris, one of our buyers, last call, he told us he adopted a puppy named Bosco, and he was really excited about the new puppy, and the kids were loving it. That's important. That's not a technical detail, but that's part of discovery is what's making Chris tick. What is just humans being humans. If it's important to you, whether it's a technical need or a requirement, or that you adopted a puppy and you're loving it, that's important to me as well. So on the next call, I'm going to go to my workspace. I'm going to refresh right before the call and check my highlights. Process automation, speed's a key decision factor. Ask Chris about Bosco. People always giggle about Bosco, but Bosco closes deals, right?
That's really, really well said. That's
Yep.
really well said. Well, and Brian, the other thought that came to mind for me in terms of the value of SEs having their own workspace to capture information is it aligns with one of the ways in which I describe our responsibility in discovery, in particular as it compares to the AE's responsibility in
Yeah.
discovery. Because I think a lot of I've dealt with a lot of SEs that have struggled with the AEs who don't necessarily bring their SEs or are reluctant to bring their SEs in for quote additional discovery
Sure.
because in their mind I've already had a conversation with the customer. Here's what they told me. Let's just get in there and do it. And the way I describe our responsibility, it's analogous to a definition that I heard of IQ a number of years ago.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've heard me share this, Brian. Some of you listening probably have not. Have you ever thought of the definition of IQ? Like, what does it actually mean to have a high IQ? And I mean, we all sort of kind of know what it means. Like, well, it's people who are smart. But what does it really mean? Well, without going into too much detail, allow me to simply suggest that the definition of IQ is the ability to make finer distinctions.
Mm.
For example, Brian, I don't know if you're a golfer or if you're a baseball player but there are certain sports that I just don't know a lot about. Let's take
Sure.
golf, for example. I don't golf. But if I were to sit and watch, say, the Masters with somebody who's an avid golfer, they would see things that I just don't see.
Yeah.
Right? Why?
Yep.
They have a higher quote golf IQ.
Yeah.
Our role in discovery is making finer distinctions. about what the customer is trying to achieve,
Hmm.
about the best way to position the solution,
Yeah.
about the best way to position and approach the engagement from a technical or a product or a solution perspective, right? That's our role.
Yeah.
And to me, therein lies the value of having a different place, if I can use that term, a different workspace
Hmm.
for us to capture those key points, the finer distinctions
Yeah.
for the benefit of positioning the solution in a
Yeah.
correct manner.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's we you got, I mean, again, back to you can't remember every detail about every deal every day. You have to have a place to put it. Um, and also, as you said before, as SEs, we will hear things differently than an AE will, and an AE will hear things differently than we will in terms of buying cues and things like that. So, I mean, it absolutely goes both ways, which back to habit number one, if we have a good partnership with our AE, then we're in sync on these things. I mean, there's also and probe. I want to get to value as an SE, right? It's a hot topic in pre-sales around value selling. My AE is going to be asking this, should be asking the same kinds of questions about, well, what's the why behind the shovel? What's the why behind the hole? So am I asking that? Are you asking that as the AE? Like, how are we going to coordinate the discussion around it? I think that's an important part of the partnership is roles and responsibilities and how we need to get there together at some point. Um, I think also the back to something you said is around, if we can help enable or lighten the load of the AE, whether that's through good preparation, good discovery, if they see value in what we're doing, and if we coordinate and partner well, then okay, Chris, you're going to ask about some of the stuff, pain points, use cases. If I chime in, it's because I'm listening for something on a particular use case that I know it's going to be a technical blocker, and I just want to probe to see if it's there. I'm not going to say if it is on the call, but I need to ask for it. And then can you pass it over to me so I can ask this, 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 and this? And if you jump in, then that's part of the relationship that you ultimately want to get to, because then you have good joint discovery. And we said this before, the more that an SE can bring good information, good insights, help enable that AE to do well and close that deal, the more likely they're going to be to want to bring us in. I'm not asking questions just for the sake of asking questions. I'd rather do nothing. I have other things to be doing as an SE. But here's why this is important. I can't give you a great demo and prepare for one if I don't know X, Y, and Z. Otherwise,
Right.
I'm just guessing and you're guessing, and that's going to kill our win rate.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And something you mentioned triggered a thought for me too, and that is not only should we be asking for our benefit and for the benefit of the team, we should be asking for the benefit of the prospect,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
We should be asking for I mean, the best discovery is not only discovery that gives us the opportunity to gain the critical insights we need to position the solution in the best manner, but it's also one in which the customer themselves are beginning to consider things that they hadn't considered,
Yeah.
right? If we can ask questions that get them to maybe broaden the way they otherwise think about how to achieve what it is that they're trying to achieve, or the fact that they can actually do more than maybe they otherwise had considered,
Yeah.
all the better. The one final thing that I'll share is around this particular point, and I'm looking at the time. I know we've almost been an hour. Is one of the most important aspects of discovery is the customer is giving the customer the opportunity to feel heard and
Mhm.
understood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the more they feel heard and understood by the organization or the quote the vendor, the more likely they are to want to hear what we have to say and
Hmm.
want to partner with us. So and I think we tend to bring that, we have the opportunity to bring that voice more so than sales. Why? we're not as emotionally attached to the opportunity.
Hmm.
We're not as emotionally attached to the commission, generally speaking. So we are more likely to give that customer the feeling of truly being heard and understood. And I think that's an important part of our role too.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of picking up on that. I'm seeing, some of the chats from Clifford. Thanks for joining in. And Clifford says, as a technical specialist overlay, I walked out of many meetings with with opportunities for the account team, not even in a space, but could listen, hear the clues, and say, I can find something for you because you know what to listen for and are delivering value to that particular customer. And then also, some further comments from Clifford. Thanks again around how the importance of that centralized repository so everybody's on the same page, aligned with what's going on, not just from a AE SE perspective, but again, kind of broadening out with the rest of the organization. We have data that no one else has, but everyone wants. Something else on the discovery side of it, and we kind of back to an AE says, well, I did discovery, you don't need to, or we just need to do the demo. I already did the discovery. Here's what you need to know. There are reasons for that, right? And
Mm,
AEs, I've not talked to that buying team yet. Maybe you as the AE have. You know something about them, their personality, their motivation, their anxiousness or anxiety around finding something, whatever it is. So if you've got the right relationship and you come to me as my AE and say, Brian, don't ask any discovery questions, just give this kind of demo, I might push back and be like, no, I need to ask these things. You're going to say, no, 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 listen, here's why. For this one, just follow my lead on it because here's why. Now, if you don't get that, of course, you can push back, you can talk to your manager, but when you have the right relationship, the AE is giving you the guidance and you can kind of play that role. Another way I see SEs be, if they really need to get that in there, but they've got a difficult AE, is find some good again, never surprise your AE. That's always the worst thing. It's never going to end well. They're going to go up to their managers, go to your manager, and now you're kind of getting, your hand slapped on something. But you can use the demo if you can't do upfront discovery. And there's not a way to do hey, before we get into the demo, I've got a couple of extra questions that I'd like to review just to make sure I heard things correctly, which is the way I like to do it, is I just want to make sure I heard things correctly. This, and this. And then also I'm going to pepper in this, and this, which weren't asked yet to get some information. And then the other part of it is I'm on a call, or if I have to do a demo already, uh, where that question would come in or where it's relevant, I can be in the demo, I can be at this part of my software and ask the question there. Now, sometimes we hear this and sometimes we hear this. Before I show you this part, are you this or that? And that can give me the answer to the question I need because I know I wasn't able to answer it before because my AE said, please don't, like we don't have time or we have to move on, but do it in the demo. It's all about coordination, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I have a term for what you're describing. I call it discovery in disguise.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Exactly.
looks like a demo because they're saying, I mean, what box do I need to check to call it a demo?
Yeah.
The customer sees product.
Yeah.
So it's a demo, but really I'm using it as an opportunity to draw
Yeah.
them out and do discovery in the process.
And I
So
mean, discovery in disguise. I mean, I love that, right? I think sometimes that sounds like, oh, we're disguise. No, we're just using that as the right point. Just like somebody puts up a slide like we've been doing today to have a visual, to talk around. It's kind of the same thing, is I'm going to use this as a visual in order to have a conversation. Yeah. Well, Chris, we have 1 minute left here, and obviously we got through two of the six habits. So if we keep this up, we have two more webinars that we need to get scheduled to finish this out, and then maybe even a fourth one of Beyond the Six Habits. But thanks so much for joining today and participating in this conversation. This was fantastic.
yeah, well, thanks for having me, Brian. You and I always enjoy chatting, when it's just the two of us. So this is no different, and hopefully the audience got a little bit out of it in the process. So
Fantastic.
always, and I do look forward to the next one. In fact, I've got I happen to have so we covered 1 and 2. We still have 3, 4, 5, and 6 to cover. So
Awesome.
that'll be soon to come.
Well, for everybody who's here and watches the recording, keep an eye out for the future webinars. Certainly, if you want to know more about the six habits or tech sales mastery, get in touch with Chris. If you want to learn more about Homerun, get in touch with me. I'm easily findable on LinkedIn. We both are. or through our respective websites. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Brian. Bye-bye.